Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 234 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Our second book, it's called From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing. So go and pick up that book today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, the biggest thing that I miss about Buffalo, New York, where I went to school for my undergraduate days, is gotta be the Buffalo wings, which Duff's, I'm telling you, is the king of buffalo wings. So if you're in Buffalo, yes, they were invented at Anchor Bar. I'm not gonna fight you on that. But Duff's has perfected the buffalo wing. So if you ever find yourself in Buffalo, New York, that's where I'm gonna be sending you, and that's where I'm gonna be sending our next guest. Our next guest is making his second appearance on the show. It's Dr. Shyam Sriram. He has been involved in the fields of secondary and higher education going back all the way to 2003. He's worked as a teaching assistant at a Hispanic Service Institution, teaching assistant at a large urban university, taught full-time at a large community college in a southern state, worked as an adjunct professor at a historically Black college, spent a year working at two private Islamic schools in suburban Chicago, then 2 summers working with inner city high school students in Atlanta, and then all kinds of intensive grading workshops with advanced placement exams. He's taught dozens of classes, he's mentored thousands of students, and now he realizes more than ever there is a need for quality professionals in higher ed that are not just great teachers, but also great administrators. Here at Greek University, he speaks about cultural appropriation and inclusion on college campuses all across the country. Welcome back to the show, Shyam.
Thank you. Nice to be here from my basement in Spokane, Washington.
I love it. I love it. You know, I look forward to conversations with you all the time because, you know, your perspective, I think, is just so important. It's just so needed. And as you know, I'm building out this following on TikTok and everything else and Instagram, et cetera. I think about opportunities where we can talk about inclusion on college campuses because every opportunity we get, we've got to take it. Our work here is never done. I mean, it's something that we have to just keep doing week after week after week after week. There is no end. I mean, there is none. And so it's never, you never really reach the finish line. It's just a matter of constantly talking about it. So I really appreciate your time. Yeah, so first, let's just start out with congratulations. I am super proud that you got your new job at Canisius College in Buffalo, New York. So tell us about this new position that you got, and what are you most looking forward to in terms of your move to Western New York?
Absolutely. So first, it's great to see you again and to be part of the Greek U family. And I have such good memories of the first time we did this, which was, you know, probably about 1.5 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
When I was living in Indianapolis. So the first thing I'll say is, I think what a lot of students don't realize about academia is how hard it is to get a tenure track position. I think a lot of students don't even understand, I didn't definitely when I was their age, how this whole thing works is that when people go to college, like there are different rankings, right? And that the goal of a tenure position is that it provides stability. So you start out as an assistant professor, then you become an associate professor, then a full professor, and that provides a certain amount of stability. What I think a lot of students don't know is how rare tenure track positions are now. And I don't have an exact number, but I think less than 40% of all academics in the US are in a tenured or tenure track position. The bulk of it is, like for me, for the last 4 years, since finishing my PhD at the University of California at Santa Barbara, I've just been kind of bouncing around the country, 1 year in Charleston, 2 years in Indianapolis, now 1 year in Spokane, and now I'm going to Buffalo. And it's, I think sometimes people think that like, why are you moving so much? Because I'm chasing something that's elusive, and what's elusive is the tenure track position. And it is actually much more arduous for women of color and certain marginalized groups who already are rare to receive PhDs. And just that the thing is, I love being a professor, I love teaching, but I also recognize that academia is kind of cruel in this way. It doesn't quite value you based on what you think is a good fit. Every school has its own idea. So let me transition to Canisius. Why I'm really excited about Canisius, Mike, is that first of all, like Gonzaga, it is Jesuit, and there's something about the Jesuit teaching what's called Ignatian pedagogy, this thing I want to call cura personalis, which is Latin for the whole person. It's not just about intellectual, it's emotional, spiritual, physical. I really feel that these Jesuit schools really emphasize that. And they don't want a student to succeed at the extent that something is not right emotionally or spiritually. So I love that. I also love Canisius because the department I'm joining is kind of rebuilding. So I am the first of hopefully a few more future hires that also are focused more on immigration and race and politics to kind of change the nature. Because I think a lot of people don't know this. I mean, even you may not, even though you went to the University of Buffalo, is that Erie County, New York, resettles more refugees than any other county in the state of New York. And because I'm an expert on refugee resettlement, even when I give my job talk at Canisius, a lot of the people in the audience, students and faculty, didn't know this. So I think there's a natural transition for me to be what I call like a scholar practitioner. I'm going to be writing articles, I'm going to do research, but I'm going to be very involved with the refugee community through volunteering or other things as well. And I'm just excited about that. I also love the fact that Buffalo is just an hour and a half south of Toronto, 6.5 hours from New York City, which opens up, Philly and that whole side, 3.5 hours from Cleveland, 4 hours from Detroit, maybe, and it just opens up the whole thing. So I've been to 48 states. I'm excited about just traveling and exploring more. So there's lots to love.
That's fantastic. What a great opportunity in Buffalo, New York. And you're right. I don't think a lot of people really understand the role that Buffalo, New York has played for refugees and other people. So I absolutely think there's room to educate on that because, yeah, was I familiar with it? No, not until you started talking about it. Yeah. So I think there is a gap that you can fill there. And I think it's a wonderful community. And, even seeing Gonzaga, I mean, I still remember with great fond memories when you gave me a tour of Gonzaga, and it really made me appreciate, I think, some of these Jesuit institutions and how they're really connecting all phases of spirituality into the higher ed world. And you just don't see that on every campus. And so it is unique in that way. And I think you're going to enjoy Canisius for the same reasons why you enjoyed Gonzaga. I think you're also going to enjoy Canisius as well. And now we are in Ramadan. So what is Ramadan and how can I be more respectful to my Muslim friends during this time period?
Yeah, let me just say one more thing you mentioned about the spiritual nature. Yeah. So even though there's very few Muslim students, faculty, staff at Gonzaga, I feel very respected as a Muslim because I'm not essentialized for being Muslim. Rather, I feel that the university wants me to be part of the culture because I add to it. And for example, this year, for the first time ever in the history of Gonzaga, the COG, which is the university's dining area, is offering meals to help people break their fast.
Wow.
And that was 3 months of working with people and educating and talking. And even though there's only a few students doing it, the benefit is actually twofold. One is because I want this for all schools. I want a school on a campus tour. If a Jewish parent or a Muslim parent or a Hindu parent says, what are the dining options for my kids? I want every school to be able to say, we have kosher options, halal options. Hindus often don't eat beef. When I was a kid growing up in the 80s in Chicago, I think a lot of people don't know this, but you might remember this, is that McDonald's fries used to be made with lard.
Yeah.
Oreos used to be made with lard, right? These were things that Oreos I think are vegan now, but there was a time when I remember my mom in the 80s being vegetarian. I mean, her favorite thing was basically a baked potato from Wendy's. And then we used to go to Ponderosa, I think every week because they had a big salad bar. Yeah. But if you think how few the options were then, and now the fact that you can get a plant-based Whopper, right? Just it's kind of amazing. So anyway, about Ramadan, and also Buffalo actually has a pretty large Muslim population. It's near Toronto, which also is large. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
So Ramadan is a really special month for Muslims. It is the most special because we believe it's the month that the Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad through an intermediary. And the intermediary is the angel Gabriel, who in Arabic we call Jibril. And I'm sure most people know this, that we're not supposed to eat from, but it's not even from sunrise, because sunrise is actually later than the actual time. So right now, for us, sunrise in Spokane is like 6:30, but the time we have to stop eating is actually 4:30 when that time begins for prayer. And then it's 4:30 to about 7:30. And it's pretty long. That's 15 hours, right?
Yeah.
But the part that I think most people don't realize, Mike, is no water, right? So for people who talk a lot like me for teaching, there can be a challenge. But then the belief really is that we give up food and water and intimate relations with our partners till sundown and other things because of the belief that, God has given us so much. We want to honor him by sacrificing something. And then what I've realized, I've been Muslim. I wasn't born Muslim. I was born Hindu, and I converted when I was 26. What I realized is that it's very a mental test. It's total mental. And I can imagine like Yom Kippur, like fasting for 24 hours. It's physical because you feel weak, but it's a mental test of, and then one of the beliefs we have as Muslims is that, we're constantly aware of the influence of what we call shaitan, or just like Satan, devil, kind of trying to intimidate us. But the belief in Ramadan is that shaitan actually has no influence on our life during this month. Like his movement has been limited. But if we have any weaknesses, like I feel hungry, or I use my hunger to say I don't want to do something, then that is just from our nafs, and our nafs are like our inner desires. So it's kind of a month of purification. Like I can't blame anything else except myself. If I say like, oh, I don't have the time or whatever, I'm making that excuse because I'm weak. So I think it's a month to really focus on just the bare things, focus on God, read Quran, go to the mosque, spend time with people, break fast with people as a communal event, and just really focus on working on ourselves. So as to your original question also, the reason why I even reached out and I said, let's do this, is because we do have Muslims in the Greek system. There's no question. Any large state school, like you just visited the University of Idaho when I saw you last year.
Yeah.
There's no question there are Muslims in the Greek system, even in Idaho, let alone you go to any large school like my alma mater, Purdue, or any large school, there are Muslims in the Greek system. But yet I think a lot of times people are unaware of who's Muslim and who is not. There could be also differing levels of practice. Some younger Muslims maybe don't pray 5 times a day or don't go to the mosque, but surprisingly, a lot of Muslims fast. And I think it's because it's the one thing, even if they're not doing anything else, even though this is probably the most difficult thing to do, they want to do it because it is part of their identity. So as far as what we could do better, just in general, is just being cognizant that Ramadan is happening. And I've told you this before, one of my bigger problems in academia is that, and the same thing at Gonzaga. Gonzaga is Catholic, so Easter and Good Friday and Christmas and all these things are focused. But then I sometimes wonder, they organize events at like 12 o'clock on a Friday when I have to go for prayers, or a Friday evening. And then I think, what about the Jewish students who are keeping Shabbat? So I just think it's the same thing, just being aware if you have Muslim members, and, maybe not and it's difficult because college students want to party Friday night or they want to go out, but maybe being mindful, like maybe there's a rush dinner and you decide to hold a dinner at 6 o'clock, not thinking that you have 2 Muslim members who can't break their fast till 7:30. I've been in that situation where I've gone to dinners and just had to watch people eat and drink. And sometimes it's unavoidable, but I think we can do better.
Yeah, I agree. We definitely can do better. And you're right. We see similar things in Judaism too around the fast. Yeah, it's 24 hours. It's really, really difficult because we also aren't drinking water during that time. But I think there's a lot of Jewish friends that I have. They won't celebrate anything all year round, but they will do that one day, even though it's the hardest. because it is a part of their identity. And it's like, if they do nothing else, that's the one thing they're going to do each
Right.
year. So we see the same kind of thing, I think,
Yeah.
with Muslims.
The other thing I would say is, I think for Greeks, I think it would be helpful for someone in the leadership, whether the president or vice president or someone, to just keep aware of Jewish holidays even. Most people know about Yom Kippur, they know about Rosh Hashanah, they might know about Hanukkah, but most people don't know about Purim or Sukkot or other things. So just being, or Tu B'Shvat, like just being aware, right? And that knowing that maybe people have different obligations, because I imagine there's a fraternity or sorority somewhere who's going to watch this, who being like, maybe they penalized or someone who couldn't attend a social event, but maybe they felt they had to go to the temple that day. And we haven't even talked about Hindu students or Sikh students or Jain students or Buddhist students who felt like they had to be somewhere else. So just being more aware of religious holidays.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you're a member of Alpha Chi Rho fraternity, which, let's be honest, I mean, this is a traditionally white fraternity.
Right.
So how can our fraternities and sororities today attract, retain, and graduate a diverse and inclusive group of students? And when I'm talking about diversity and inclusion, I'm thinking about things such as race, but also religion, disabilities, sexual orientation, socioeconomic differences, international communities, and also age. I mean, we have a lot of military veterans that are coming back to college campuses. So how do we attract, retain, and graduate a diverse group of students?
Yeah, it's a great question. It has different elements. I'll say one thing about Alpha Chi Rho is that, first of all, I'll say that I think that even the way we think about diversity, we could also fine tune that, because, and I've said this in my own writing as well, like, I think that there's a tendency in America to view whiteness as a monolith. And I even brought this up when I did a DEI kind of keynote for the Alpha Chi Rho for their convention, which is, we need to think about, okay, yes, historically predominantly white, yes, founded in, on the East Coast, headquarters in Neptune, New Jersey, all of that, correct, right? But I think when we think about whiteness, there's a tendency, and I want to be very clear, there are probably people watching this who are going to disagree, but I don't view America as just white and then non-white, because whiteness itself could be communities that when they first came to America were not thought of as white, of which there are many. And then on top of that, like, whiteness can be complex. For example, people from Bosnia are Muslim, but they are Slavic, and Polish people are also Slavic, and Russians are also Slavic. So when we talk about identity, like, whiteness sometimes removes like the richness of people's identity, whether it's Jewish or Muslim or first gen recent immigrants versus back in the day immigrants. And I think a lot of Americans don't know their family stories. And then they just kind of be subsumed by this idea of whiteness. But I think whiteness itself is complex. So I just want to say that you might have a fraternity that is very white, but we're talking about many, many different kinds of identities. And now more and more Americans are biracial, multiracial. And I think those folks often get left out because they have multiple identities. They're half white, half Latino, half white, half Korean, half white, half Armenian. And I think college can be cruel in that way, because people are often asked to choose an identity. And maybe they don't want to choose. Maybe they want to exist in multiple worlds. I had a student last semester at Gonzaga who was Cuban American, but because she was so fair, she was like white passing. And people often, I think, made comments about Latinos or Latinx folks in front of her without realizing that she herself identified as Latina. And I think, imagine that multiplied in a sorority where people may not know how they're saying, or fraternity. So I want to say that. The second thing I'm really proud of Alpha Chi Rho doing last year, and I think, I'm sure there are other fraternities that have done it and sororities, and then some that haven't done it, is they added sexual orientation to the landmarks. And I want to acknowledge the work of my Alpha Phi chapter brother, Brett Morgan, who's the national ritual officer for Alpha Chi Rho, for really pushing that. And I think that was needed, because for a long time it was about creed, religion, and the quality of man, but not accounting for sexuality. So, you connected me, and I was able to speak with Phi Mu Delta, and they really value that in their members. And I want to acknowledge like how many of their members identify as gay or queer or trans. And I think that's amazing. So I'll answer this way. Change has to be from the national level. See, the problem is that I think there are lots of chapters. Like, okay, our chapter, the Alpha Phi chapter at Purdue, was more diverse than other chapters. But that may also have been because the chapter had rechartered. They were looking for new guys. They decided to maybe not go a traditional way. So we had a lot of Asian people, Black people, Jewish people. We probably had some gay members also. And in looking back in retrospect, but I think to sustain it, I feel like the change has to be national, because otherwise, and you can appreciate this, otherwise you'll have one or two chapters that might be more diverse. But then maybe when those guys go to a convention, they realize how different their chapter is from the norm. So I really feel it has to be from the national headquarters, not just the landmarks. It has to be about the leadership, about who's on national boards, national councils. And then to your point, yeah, I want fraternities and sororities like you to succeed because I want them to be places of inclusion. The problem is historically they have been the sites of exclusion, right? The fact that legacy rules and just the cost of being a member in a fraternity or sorority could be so high that it blocks out all the non-traditional students who are working and going to school at the same time. So yeah, I want the change to happen. It can happen, but it requires like a real fundamental shift in the way we think. And I think that's the difficult part, because Greeks often want to follow the herd. But I think now we're in a crucial time with Me Too and BLM and just other things that we're talking about more, that we really get to confront the prejudices that we see among us.
That's a great answer. And I agree with you too. I do think that there has to be somebody from the national leadership that really champions this idea that we need to become more diverse. And, you know, within your example, we're talking about, let's say, sexual orientation, for example, that we really need to put together some kind of a committee and actually do the work to actually figure out what do we need to do to be more inclusive as an organization, as these college campuses become more and more diverse. I think it is very important. And you're right. I think there are individual chapters, you know, let's take any fraternity, you know, they might have a particular chapter. One that I'm thinking of in California, they're 100% Latino. And so within themselves, they thought, look at how diverse we are. And I'm like, well, you don't really understand what diverse means then. But yeah, when they went to national convention, then, you know, we can see that this is a diverse group within 120 chapters, for example. And so it's hard for individual chapters to organize in that way, but the national leadership can make it a priority and then get buy-in from all these different chapters.
So let me give you another example. When I was at Butler, I was very happy to be the chapter advisor to Phi Delta Theta. And I really loved that experience, especially because I got to watch and participate kind of in their national convention conference, which I just forget the name now. But what was cool about it was two things. One thing I liked was every member of the fraternity had a bond number, which they would say, I'm so-and-so, bond number of ... which was like this unique number that they were bonded to the fraternity. I thought that was so cool. But the other thing I remember even reaching out to their leadership, because I was so thankful, was they had a video about like alcohol education and risk management. And in the video, and I think they used a chapter on the West Coast, like Berkeley or something, but I think two of the brothers in the video were of South Asian descent. Actually, it wasn't alcohol, it was I think mental illness, mental health, maybe alcohol also. And I just remember being so moved, because I think I've told you this before, that when I was in college, I lost multiple friends to suicide. And I like to tell people I didn't even know I was depressed because I didn't even know what that meant. But to see a video with someone of South Asian descent suffering with mental illness, it really moved me, because I felt like if I had been in that position and seen a video of someone who looked like me, I would have felt seen. And I think those things matter a lot. And I think we need to take a look at our programming and the videos we put together. And sometimes the videos are incredibly dated. And we need to like redo our media and our materials to be more inclusive. And again, to your, I think sometimes people push back on inclusivity because it seems impossible, because how do you get everyone's voice, right? How do you bring everyone to the table? And we know that it's not fully possible, but it's the attempt, right? Like, to be sincere, and maybe to have someone in a video who's deaf, right? Troy Kozer just won an Oscar, right? The first deaf, the second one after Marley Matlin, that was 1987. So like, like we need to have deaf members, but not to tokenize them, not like, hey, be in this video to be this thing. Use, as I've talked before, like we use people for, to represent who we are, our values, not to tokenize them and essentialize them. But I think it's important. Like, I would love to see some fraternity or sorority put out a recruitment video or risk management video that actually had a Jewish person, a Muslim person. Do you know what that would do to put out a sorority video with someone in hijab? Like, I think that alone, it would be, and I don't think these are that difficult to do, but I think people aren't thinking about them.
Yeah. I love your vision. I think it's
Or
extraordinary.
a yarmulke. Like, just someone wearing a yarmulke in a video and then saying like, hey, Mike, you coming to the social? No, I have to go to shul. Wow. Right? I have to go to the Hillel. There's an event. Oh, you should come with us. No, man, and they're like, well, and then someone just saying, I respect the fact that you follow your Jewish faith. Yeah. Just saying that, I think, would matter.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's huge. And it's difficult because, if it's like API, the Jewish fraternity, sure, it's a little bit easier to do that. In an organization where it's not rooted in any particular religion, then it becomes saying, well, why are we doing that? Are we not celebrating the other members? And so it's the chicken or the egg, It's
right. So the answer I would give to people for that is, see, sadly, the norm in the United States is Christian.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, some people might be upset when I say that, but the point being is that most Americans are still Christian. So it is assumed that Christianity forms the base. Right. So then anything that is not Christian is seen as different. And I think obviously we need to push back against the idea of difference, meaning that the other religions are not different. They're just part of the American fabric, right? And I think that's where the acceptance that, like, there's a reason we don't say Christian American, but we say Jewish American or Muslim American or Buddhist American, because Christian American is the norm. Yeah. In fact, I would be a little bit freaked out if someone identified themselves as a Christian American, because then I would think they were like a Christian nationalist or something, right? Mm-hmm. So I just think we need to, look, you and I are on the same page. We've always been on the same page. I think the Greek system, FSL, should be the place of change.
Yeah, I agree completely. Let's talk about faculty and staff, because you kind of hinted at it before at Gonzaga with very few people that were Muslim faith, for example. So right. Why is it important for faculty and staff at the university also attract and retain a diverse and inclusive community?
It is the most important. It's a fantastic question, because here's I'll do this in the form of what I saw as it was a Twitter question. Someone tweeted, what grade were you when you had your first Black teacher? And I grew up in the US, then I went to India for high school. So the first Black teacher I had was as a sophomore, junior at Purdue. And it was Dr. Judson Jeffries, and I took Black politics with him. I'm actually going to see him next month at Ohio State. And I mean, I was a junior in college when I had my first Black teacher. Yeah. But the point of that is that most people don't have a Black teacher in school, K through 12. It's often in college. And I think that vignette is illustrative of the point I'm trying to make, is that it's really important for students to see themselves represented in their faculty. Because, the descriptive representation, seeing someone who looks like you, someone who's had maybe different experiences, but maybe the same. Like, I can tell you that I've taught so long, almost 20 years, that when I tell students that I'm the child of immigrants, that alone opens a little door, right? Or brings down the wall, what they call in ESL, the affective filter, which is that non-native English speakers sometimes put up a wall, and then because they're so uncomfortable speaking English. And then it's the responsibility of the instructor to bring down that wall by coming up with assignments that anyone can participate in. So when I say I'm the child of immigrants, or I went to high school in India, or just even saying in class as a Muslim, I think those things do matter. because I think then it sends a signal to students who either that, okay, my professor is so proud of his heritage that he talks about it in a way that maybe a white professor would not. Like, I don't know how many white professors would say or talk a lot about their heritage because maybe they don't think about their heritage, but I think about the fact that I'm Indian all the time, or that I speak different languages all the time. And I think that matters. As I said, I think it matters for the kind of students that a university can or college can bring in, for them to be able to, like on a campus tour, right, to acknowledge, like this happens sometimes at Gonzaga. I'll be walking through and there'll be a tour and I can see the moms and the dads, they smile at me and I smile at them. And they know that I'm faculty, not just because I'm wearing a suit or because my hair is gray, but they know. And I think those things matter because I want people to recognize that this college has a diverse set of faculty, because we believe that it's the diverse set of experiences that makes better teachers. See, that's the thing that I think people forget, Mike, is that yes, all these professors have PhDs from all these different schools, which makes them academically qualified. But what you want is a different set of experiences. Like, I have not had a typical PhD career compared to other people. I was 34 when I started my PhD. You know, I was older than some of the professors in my department at UCSB, but that also brought with it a certain set of experiences that other people didn't have. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. It's the same logic. We want diverse chapters. We need diverse faculty because we want students to have different experiences. That's why I'm always encouraging friends of mine to teach community college. I taught community college for 6 years. It's a big part of my life. I think community college is awesome because you have people who teach it who have been experts in their field. So I'm always trying to get people to go teach community college on the side because I think students need that.
Let's continue down the road. I think the next thing to look at is the actual curriculum. So right. How do we enhance diverse and inclusive learning on campus and right. also in our organizations like fraternities and sororities?
Absolutely. So this has become very political recently because particularly of the new governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, who has, even before he became governor, was kind of at war with the book Beloved by Toni Morrison, arguing that it shouldn't be taught in schools, that the content was too racy, that parents should have more control of what their kids learn. Yes, I think parents should be more involved, but I think what historically is that we have trusted teachers and the education system and the work that teachers do. And teachers are amazing, and they go years and years sometimes without getting acknowledgement for what they do, but we all have benefited from the teachers we've had. So I think we need to acknowledge that. I think that obviously the US education system needs some work for sure, especially in public schools in areas that don't have a lot of resources to hire good teachers. But I think in terms of curriculum, we want and this is again, very political now because of this whole argument about CRT, critical race theory. So let me just use this moment to just explain that critical race theory, and I'm going to echo the comments of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson during her confirmation hearing when she was being grilled by Senator Ted Cruz. I will say that critical race theory is itself not taught in K through 12, right? As a theory, it's taught. My training in grad school partly trained me as a critical race theorist, but it's taught in colleges and law schools and other places. Now, I think where people are, I don't want to, I know that there's a lot of controversy about this topic, and I want to be clear that I think there's this notion that critical race theory teaches people to hate white people. And that's not at all. It's not like people are going, I want you to hate this person or hate this person. It's not that. It's just an acknowledgement that the foundations of this country, the roots of this country, are often in some sort of like white heteronormativity, right? And just acknowledging, just as I said, the fact that, okay, this is what I will tell people. If someone says, no, this is a colorblind country, I said, if that's true, why do we have historically Black colleges and universities? Why do we have Howard, Spelman, Morehouse, AUC, Tennessee State, Florida A&M, Hampton-Sydney? Why do we have these? Because these students were not allowed to go to majority white schools. The reason we have Latinx fraternities and sororities, Asian American, etc., is because they didn't find a place for them and they found their own paths. So at the same way, education historically has been very exclusive, right? In terms of the content, the authors taught at school, the teachers. So again, whoever's watching this, if you're in college, could really seriously consider a career in education. If you don't want to go to education, run for school board. Like, look what just happened in Tennessee. Yeah. They banned Art Spiegelman's Mouse because they thought the content was wrong. It is exactly that kind of content. Like, I've told you this before, I think I did a minor in Jewish studies at Purdue. I took Hebrew, I studied so many things. And I think that actually opened my mind to so many possibilities in education. So I would tell people, we need more diverse people to go into teaching. You know, we need, like, for example, I don't think there's not enough men even teaching primary school. I think a lot of men end up teaching high school or social studies, but we need men and women and however people identify to go into education. We need better principals, assistant principals, administrators. We need better school psychologists. My oldest friend, Tim Dowling, I've known him since I was in kindergarten, like 37 years at this point. He is a school psychologist in Illinois. And we need more like administrative staff. We need, and I want to say we do need people of color and different diversities, but fundamentally we need people who care. We need people who really are caring about the student, because those students are going to go to college. So I think a lot of the work has to happen there.
Agreed. Next, let's talk about climate, because I think, you know, we've now understood that belonging and inclusion goes a long way in terms of retaining students and getting them all the way through to graduation. And you gave me that tour of Gonzaga and you showed me the grottos where people are praying. Yeah. You know, so it started in my mind thinking about this idea of fostering a community culture that values, respects, welcomes, and promotes a sense of belonging for the students. So what can colleges and universities do to foster that kind of a community culture?
100%. First thing, and I can't stress this enough, is really recognizing and appreciating gender pronouns. Okay, this is a tough one because I think people, like I'm 42, I'll say people over the age of 40, maybe 50, really resistant to gender pronouns. But what they don't realize is that, first of all, sexuality is not a binary. Okay, we know this, right? It's a spectrum. But more importantly, that if somebody wants to identify as a they or them or non-binary, then at the very least, acknowledging that takes so little effort on our part. So really recognizing gender pronouns, recognizing, and even more importantly, Mike, than recognizing gender pronouns, is holding someone accountable if they misgender. I can't stress this enough, like all fraternities, sororities, higher ed administration, if you know somebody wants, if you know that someone who perhaps biologically born male, but wants to identify as she, her, hers, calling that person him or something else, you are literally telling that person, I don't value your identity. Similarly, right, like, for example, Vice President Kamala Harris, her mom is from India, her dad is from Jamaica, she identifies as African American. That's her right. That's her privilege to identify as African American. And when we also call people by identity that they don't subscribe to, I think we are fundamentally not acknowledging who they are. So I think that's the first part. The second part, I've said this before in multiple presentations now, even though the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law in 1990, I think a lot of Greek life is still not accessible, right? No ramps, okay? How is someone who has I don't know, I'm thinking of a disease like muscular dystrophy, right? But they want to be part of a fraternity or sorority. They should be able to, because they can participate. What if they can't even get into the house, right? So no ramps, very little accessible programming. What I mean by that is, are your websites easily accessible by people who are hard of hearing or who are blind? If someone is blind and wants to join a fraternity or sorority, do they know where to go? Or is it just that they don't know what to do because there's nothing being targeted at them? The presumption that everyone who wants to be in the Greek system has full access to sight and to hearing and to be able to talk is absurd. right? Like we need to acknowledge these things. And I think the challenge also in the Greek life is that we need to really break free from legacy rules. I think people are doing that now.
Yep.
But before I go in there, I'll just say that just accepting that people want to be in Greek life from different ways of life, but they may not even know about it because the programming doesn't target them, right? Or I think sometimes you and I know this, that fraternities and sororities can hold social events that have some less than desirable names, right? And that can also exclude people. I'll give you one example. At Butler, they had a sorority where there was a sorority that I think had a pretty large number of like women who identified as gay, lesbian, etc. And I think that was awesome. But there was a situation where a woman in a sorority wanted to lavalier a woman in another thing. But there was because lavaliering is usually a fraternity man doing it to a woman, but she wanted to do it for another woman. And I don't think ultimately it happened because there was almost nothing in the books to allow it to happen. And I just think these things are so silly in the scheme of things, right? Like, clear, the lavaliering element is awesome, but the resistance we give in the Greek system, oh, it's not the way it's been done. Maybe we need to change these rules because they don't really matter anymore. So.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, these organizations are over 100 years old, so it's very, very difficult to bring change when something has been going on for 100 years because the members themselves said, well, I went through it, and I turned out fine. So why should we change? Like, what's the reason to change? And so that's the resistance. And many times it does come from the alumni. Let me just say that.
Yeah.
You know, I think the undergraduates are much more willing to make these changes as you're talking about sexual orientation, for example. But I do think sometimes it's the alumni that resist more often than not. And they have tremendous power. I mean, for us to say that they don't have power is naive. I mean, many times they control finances, they control the house because the alumni own the
Housing
house.
corporation, right?
Yeah,
right.
housing corporation. So it's not like the undergrads can just do whatever they want. I mean, there are some expectations from alumni that, you know, they want to be met.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What happens if there's a fraternity chapter or a sorority, whatever it is, that has a trans member? Right. So, because I've heard of this happening,
Sure.
what would, in that case, like, let's say you have someone who identifies as a man who has transitioned or is transitioning from identifying as a woman, and they want to rush a fraternity and they want to live in-house. I think there are some people who, I think, again, younger people are more accepting.
Right.
But what should a chapter do then, in your opinion, if the alumni or the building corporation makes up some bullshit excuse that like women can't be living in the house because they don't see them as, you know, I don't know. Yeah.
No, I think it's a great question. And I wish that there was one uniform answer. There isn't. That's the problem. And I think each fraternity looks at it differently.
Right.
And so each fraternity has come up with recently, within the last couple of years, their own rules regarding transgender members. And so, you know, one example might be that they really look to the state ID, such as a driver's license, to determine sex, right? So if it says male, then that's fine. If they're transgender and they went to the state ID and got it changed, then great. Universities, I think they change between, let's say, male to female. That's a little bit more fluid, but I think in the state level, you have to have all kinds of proof and documentation in order to get that changed on the state level. So, you know, the answer is it's different for every fraternity. And so my advice would be to contact the headquarters and have that conversation, make sure you understand what the rules are around that, and do the best that you can to comply. But I think it's always, you know, whether we're talking about religion or, you know, sexual orientation or whatever, many times these changes come from the undergrad. So while, yes, we do need to have a champion on the national level, many times change comes through the chapters themselves, because the chapters are making decisions based on who best exemplifies the values of the fraternity without consideration to all these other things. And ultimately, if we can get that groundswell movement from the undergrads, remember, the undergrads are really the ones that control most of the fraternity revenue on the national side. So the undergraduates actually have much more power than they think.
I
And
agree.
so if we can get enough chapters to say, hey, we need to make a change to the bylaws, then I think they can come together at convention, get those bylaws changed to more accurately reflect what's really happening on the ground.
I agree. Yeah, I
So
like it.
hopefully that
I
answers.
interviewed you. Look at that.
No,
Ha.
that's great. I love it. I have no problem with it. I think that's
Yes.
fantastic. I also want to talk about the surrounding community around these campuses, right?
Sure.
So, how can we engage diverse community beyond the boundaries of
Sure.
campus?
Well, I'll start with this, tying into the original topic of like Ramadan and all of that
Yeah.
is I think fraternities and sororities are kind of missing out on something, which is that first of all, like like for example, I think fraternities and sororities obviously should have more diverse food options. I would like to believe that sororities probably have been doing this a little bit longer, in terms of especially like gluten-free or allergen-free or other things options. But like, I think it would be great if fraternities and sororities took the time to maybe compile a list of kosher restaurants or halal restaurants or vegan restaurants, and then just put it in a public place in the sorority, or give it to new members when they join the house. Or here's something I don't think, I don't know if anyone's ever done, maybe they have, is telling members where local religious institutions are. Like letting them know that that they see. I think this is the challenge, Mike. I think that a lot of people who join the Greek system who are still young, 17, 18, are still trying to figure out who they are as people. And I think sometimes they depress their religious identity because they're afraid that if they are too Christian, they talk about praise and worship, or they talk about being Jewish and going on birthright trip, or they talk about being Muslim, that they won't be accepted as members.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing. Now, I will say there probably are some Greek chapters that are limiting membership based on those things. And those are the chapters that you, particularly since you travel all over the country, need to fix, right? That culture that they have of exclusion, not realizing that we've talked about this, that sometimes people really think they're diverse, but then it's not a diversity that maybe is an acceptance with other places, right? So I would really love if the Greek chapters themselves kind of connected people more to the local community that way. The other thing I'll say is I think the problem also is even our service projects that we do, philanthropy, sometimes is very narrowly focused. Like it's, oh, let's hold a dodgeball tournament with another sorority on campus, but maybe thinking about going off campus, as long as it meets all the rules and all of that. Because like, again, at Butler, at Gonzaga is a little bit different because it's in Spokane, but even then, I think students stay within like a 1 mile radius of campus. In general, I feel like in most schools, people don't really explore the communities that they're in. Now, of course, the work I do is fundamentally about changing that, is getting people to meet people who are refugees or other people and doing that work. It's easier to do at a small school. Like I know that there's amazing faculty I've already met at Canisius that we're going to be doing that work, like connecting students to refugees and other work and all of that. But I think the problem also is that some schools don't want students to do that. They want students to stay within like a bubble. And they tell people, don't go to this street or this street. I really would wish people would do a better job of that. And also, I'll just say that I think what you and I think are on the same page also on is that where the Greek system needs to change is acknowledging that there is a misconception about Greek life, but the only way to change that misconception is the Greeks to take on the responsibility themselves. Mm. So for example, doing a philanthropy project or a service project outside of the community, outside of the normal community is good. But I want to be very clear about this because I tell my students, we talk about this all the time. Do philanthropy, don't take any social media. No social media. And I know that's anathema to your average young person who wants to post it on Instagram, post it on Snapchat, all these other apps, right? Mm-hmm. But I think is when you make it about the social media, it detracts from the mission. Okay, I'll give you an example, right? Like I was giving some dates, which is what we used to break our fast, to someone at the mosque the other day. And a student was with me from Gonzaga, who's from Indonesia, who wanted to come with us to the mosque, fine. He was taking a picture of me and I said, no pictures. And he said, why? I said, because I don't want people to think I'm doing this for social media. Mm. In fact, there's a belief in Islam, the right hand shouldn't know what the left hand is doing. And I think that's how we embrace it. So I want Greeks to embrace opportunities in the community, but not feel that, like, remove the social media element of it, because when you add that, it becomes like a white saviorism kind of complex, right? It becomes about, like, I would love people to just not feel they have to tell people that they do service. Like, let the service be something that you do. This is a big problem on study abroad trips, right? Or it's a big problem on just people wanting to document, like, oh, look at me, I'm in Rwanda. Look at me, I'm in Mexico. And what they're doing is often not even asking permission of people to take their picture. And it becomes about them, the person in Greek life, and it's not about the community. So here's my challenge is, do a philanthropic event and do not post it on social media.
Interesting. It's an interesting perspective. I'm kind of conflicted on that one because, right, if a tree falls down in the forest and nobody heard it, did it happen, right?
No, so yeah, but that's a good point. Like, to your point, like, you've been making a lot of TikToks.
Oh, sure.
You've been encouraging us to do them. And I understand what you're saying. But what I'm saying is that when we make it about the gram,
right,
it detracts from the vision. And again, what I'm trying to say is Greeks already have a problem with people thinking that they're like basically country clubs for mamas, your daddies and mommies' money. You want to break free from that, then do something that actually serves humanity, but in a way that it's not about you posting it on Instagram or using the right filter or whatever. And yeah, that's what I'm saying is just, it's a shift in thinking.
right.
That's all. Yeah.
No, I got it. Now, let's also talk about priorities on a college campus, because I think there are a lot of different priorities out there for higher ed. Obviously, GPA is something that they look at. Graduation rates, the 4-year graduation rate is a very important number on a college campus. So how do we prioritize the commitment to inclusion through leadership and action at all levels? How do we make that the priority?
Yeah, so I will say, as someone who has taught for a long time, the number one goal that you should have in college is your GPA. Okay, I can't stress this enough. Yes, you will always be a member of Kappa Kappa Gamma. You will always be a member of Pi Kappa Alpha. You will always be a member of Alpha Chi Rho or Alpha Chi Omega. I'm happy for that, right? However, your letters in time was not something that you're going to wear less and less, right? No one who's 19 believes this when I tell them, like, you're not going to wear your letters 10 years from now all the time. They're like, no, what are you saying? These are my sisters. I'm like, all right, when you're 40 and I'm 60, let's talk. And yeah, but the point is, the reason I'm bringing that up is because the GPA, it follows you your entire life. It's like a puppy, right? Like your GPA, your transcript. So here's what a lot of students don't realize. Every level of college you attain, the one you got before matters less, right? Like, I'm obviously super grateful I went to Purdue, and then I got a master's from Georgia State, and then a master's from UCSB and a PhD from UCSB. But that's only for me personally, right? But I think what a lot of students don't realize is that, yes, you will go to grad school, but anytime you apply for something, you have to submit your undergrad transcript. And your undergrad transcript clearly shows your GPA. It shows all sorts of transgressions. And yes, maybe you were 18 or 19 and completely wasted after you're, went to a party, and that's reflected in there. But how are you going to explain that for the rest of your life to people? So GPA is number one, okay? That's absolutely the most important reason to go to college, in my opinion. And people might disagree. People might say, oh, it's about networking, it's about relationships. I think those are also important. But you're getting a degree that is going to be tied to a piece of paper, which anybody you ever apply for a job or grad school is going to ask in the future. And then what are you going to say in the future? Like, oh, it was just, I had a bad couple of semesters, but I pulled it out. And that might be true. So I think GPA is number one. So to your second point, Mike, I think I've said this for a long time now, that recruitment is all about recognizing incredible people who meet the motto of our Greek fraternities and sororities, right? I'll bring up Phi Delta Theta again. Their motto is be the best version of yourself, or something like that, something equivalent to that. And I loved it, right? Because it wasn't like everyone needs to be this level, but be the best version of yourself, right? Like, that there's a potential to be better than where you are now, reach that. It's called the Pygmalion effect because of a play by George Bernard Shaw, right? Which is the basis of the movie My Fair Lady. If you set a thing and you set a level, you ask people to reach that level, right? But if I set a low standard, like, hey guys, let's just try to keep a 2.5 GPA this semester, we'll be okay. But versus if I'm the president of fraternity and I'm like, our goal this semester, 3.5. And people are going to be like, oh my God, that's insane. We're like, we add extra study tables, we add extra hours. Why? Because then people see us as Greeks who are studious. And the consequence of that is we recruit better members. And then once we recruit better members, we tap those people we see and we turn them into leaders, right? So I think it's all about recruitment, but recruitment has to be reflected in the ideals of the house. So you want better members, you have to recruit better. How do you recruit better? You change the culture of your house, whether it's GPA, inclusivity, etc. I also think the more inclusive a house is, the more diverse a house is, theoretically, it should be a house that actually does better in academics because you have lots of different perspectives and people holding each other accountable. Someone being like, hey, I want to go to the bars. You know what, Mike, I think we should stay in today and study for our Hebrew exam. Tov ma'od, all right? But I think that also doesn't happen as much when people are younger. We don't really hold each other accountable. Like I had guys I went to school with, and I didn't have a great GPA either as an undergrad, but I had guys I went to school with, like there was a guy in my fraternity who got a 0.0, right? Or 0.3. And yeah.
It's not good. I mean, there has to be somebody in that fraternity house that says, you staying home and not going to class for a week straight, that's just not acceptable. So it's building a culture of,
Right.
Scholarship into the fraternity. Many times that happens through the new members. So if you want change, many times it's through the new members. So basically when it's time to hand out bids, maybe we say that you have to have at least a 3.0 in order to get a bid. And then that, once the new members are in, that changes the culture because now we have studious people that are in our organization and we can hold up the rankings of all the fraternities on campus and show that Alpha Chi Rho is number one in terms of GPA. So more studious students are going to want to join because of it, because we have pride in that. And we can say to potential new members, hey, do you really care about GPA? If so, this is the right place for you. Here's the data to prove it.
Agreed.
Right. So all this is great. And of course, we never finish our anti-racist work. In our second book, of course, From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing, you and Stacy Kavanaugh talk about the ways that students can engage in anti-racist action. So what are some of the things on the list that students can do to engage in anti-racist action?
So I think this is a unique term that has become popularized because of the work of Ibram Kendi and other people. And I want to just acknowledge, I think there's a difference between anti-racist. Okay, a lot of people will say, I'm not racist. Okay, that is actually not enough to call yourself an anti-racist. An anti-racist is someone who is challenging institutions, policies, language, etc., in their day-to-day life. They are, and maybe you know who that person is, and maybe you know someone who's like that, but they're the person who is constantly pushing back against the system for things that they see are unnecessary. Okay, for example, one thing I love at Gonzaga is that our campus police don't have firearms. Okay, I think those things matter, especially in a climate in the United States now where it's so easy, where Black and brown lives are so cheap, right? Because they can be taken at any moment, right? And I think part of anti-racism work is, I want to be clear, I think police are very important, right? I think we need them, but I think an anti-racist would say, why is the police force not representative of the community, right? Like Minneapolis, for all the flack it has received, they have a lot of like Hmong police officers, Somali police officers, and I think that's what we need to see at other levels. So in terms of what we mean by anti-racist is someone who acknowledges the privilege they have. Look, my parents are from India, they're doctors, but I can acknowledge that I grew up with privilege. Was it white privilege? No, but it was a different kind of privilege. And I also have to acknowledge that. So I think part of this work is acknowledging where we come from, but also wanting to do better and then challenging people. For example, there's a lot of people in my family, like maybe not tons, but there's a few people who I would call racist. Okay. And I'm sure someone in my family who sees this is not going to be very happy. Now, some people might say, oh, you shouldn't, like, they're from a different generation. I don't know if I agree with that, because yes, they may be from a different generation, but that doesn't mean that they can't be open to change, right? If you hear, and I'm speaking to everyone, if you hear your aunt or uncle, your racist Uncle Steve, as I like to call him, use the N-word, right? You have a responsibility to say something. It can't be, oh, don't say anything, he went to Vietnam and he has some, no, you have to be like, we don't use this word now. In fact, my own dad, who's a very educated person, just like last year, I was telling him, or 2 years ago, I was telling him not to use the word Hispanic. And I had to explain to him that we don't say the word Hispanic because Hispanic implies Spain, and Spain implies colonialism, imperialism, etc. And even Latinx is not considered accepted by everyone, but it's better, right? So I think part of being an anti-racist is acknowledging where privilege exists, and also acknowledging that there are certain groups of people that often don't get to speak for themselves, acknowledging that we need to account for more voices of women and marginalized people and other people to speak for themselves. And in my case, as a cishet male, I also have a responsibility to use my male privilege to create opportunities for other people. So that's, I would say, a part of the work that needs to be done. Yeah.
That's excellent. I love that conversation on privilege. That's like a whole nother episode that we could get
Sure.
into is on privilege next. But usually we talk about good food, and I know you're headed to Buffalo, so I have to kind of get you ready for all of the delicacies that are going to await you in Buffalo. So, on top of Duff's Wings, which is definitely the best for the Buffalo wings, for Italian food, there's a place called Mulberry Italian, and that is lasagna all day long. So if you're into lasagna, that's the place to go. Dinosaur Barbecue, if you want brisket and ribs, oh my goodness, it's just absolutely delicious.
The 3 days I spent in Buffalo, I was just like, I could easily gain so much weight. There was so much, even just next to my hotel. I had like a wing. I got the wings, the buffalo wings and beef on weck platter, and then there was just like Italian sandwiches and beef and so much pizza. And I don't drink alcohol anymore, but like if I did, oh my God, I can see now. And someone even told me, they're like, we drink because it's cold, and I'm like, I just feel like there's some very hearty people in Western New York.
It's so true, because the saying is that Buffalo is what is it? It's a drinking town with a football problem. That's the right way to say it.
Yeah. So it's going to be an interesting transition, but I'm excited. I will say this thing about Buffalo. I love the culture. It's a city that really cares about itself.
Yeah.
They cared about the Bills before, when no one cared about the Bills. It's a hard-working town. It's a town of immigrants. It's a town of new starts. Kind of like Carl Sandburg said about Chicago, the city of big shoulders.
Yeah.
I'm excited to move to Buffalo and just live there for a while and build something there. So
yeah, the people are wonderful. You'll meet the nicest people you've ever met in your life. I wish I could give them all a big hug and move them to Nashville, because I mean, they're just fantastic people. So I think you'll really love that. Very prideful people. You'll see the banner of the Buffalo Bills everywhere, despite all of the losses. I mean, this is a losing team, but they have such pride that it's theirs.
Yeah, and so, as a Chicago Bears fan, I'm almost envious, because I feel like a lot of Bears fans are fair weather. But if we had the amount of pride that Buffalo had in their team, it'd be a different story.
You have no idea how much pride they have, and you're right. It really is a melting pot of sorts. And you have access to such great cities like Toronto, which we spent a lot of time in when I was there at school. So you're just going to have the time of your life, and you're going to love the people. So I know it's going to be really successful. Just stay warm in the wintertime. What can I say? I mean,
I grew up in Chicago, Indiana. I live in Spokane. My partner, though, she lives in Oakland, and she eventually is going to want to move there, and she's never left California. Oof. And it's going to be,
that's culture.
So she told me, she's like, I must really love you if I'm willing to move from Oakland to Buffalo, and I'm like,
I can't wait to have that conversation with her around December, January timeframe. I'll be like, do you still love him? I mean, do you still?
yeah, yeah,
That's going to be great. Well, I can't wait to visit you out there. I think it's going to be so
absolutely.
much fun, and we'll continue the conversation. But to our listeners, listen, if you're looking to book Dr. Sriram as a speaker on your college campus, visit www.greekuniversity.org/Shyam. It's spelled SHYAM, or just click on any of his links on diversity, equity, and inclusion on the Greek University website. I think the world of him, and I think after this interview, I think you do too. So bring him to your college campus so that way you can continue this conversation with your students. And Shyam, what can I say, man? I love everything about you. I think you're a rock star, and can't wait for the year ahead.
I'll just say one final point. If anyone wants to wish someone happy Ramadan, we say Ramadan Mubarak, right? Or Ramadan Kareem. So that's just tell someone Ramadan Mubarak, their face will just light up. So
yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you to our students, to our listeners. If you like this conversation with Shyam, please like it. Please share it with other college students on campus. And we look to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much. And we'll see everybody next time.